what are we talking about today?
Heman, I was going to talk to you about novel writing.
Okay.
I guess I was just downstairs at Wilkinson. You have a new piece, or a piece that's new to me anyway,
Yes.
which you took the production budget for a project and you had it printed in real money. And you took real dollar bills, Taiwanese dollars? Taiwanese dollar bills. And you, how much was the denomination on them?
2,000.
2,000 apiece.
Yeah.
And you put them into 12 books, is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then these are all works by Roberto Bolaño,
Yes.
who's a Chilean novelist,
Yeah.
whom I really like. And then you inserted the bills into the books, kind of like bookmarks,
Yeah.
and then you refiled the books in public libraries.
Yes.
Just in Taipei or all over Taiwan?
Just in Taipei.
Just in
because the whole basis of the exhibition just was primarily centered around a space that's very crucial to the scene itself. So it didn't make sense for it to happen outside of Taipei anyway.
I was impressed that, first of all, that Bolaño's works were in both English and Spanish, and were there any
And
French in the libraries?
Yes.
First of all, why Taipei? Why Bolaño in Taipei?
Yeah. The whole project came about when I was invited to make a piece, to produce a new piece for an exhibition in the Taipei Contemporary Art Center. So what happened was that I found out very quickly that the entire show was paid for by a collector. So that the whole basis of the exhibition sort of surrounded, there was this cloud that sort of surrounded all the sort of discussions about what we would give to the collector at the end of the whole exhibition process. So I think a lot of the artists within that show sort of thought about that and played with that. For example, like Sun Yan and Peng Yu from Beijing, they developed this project where they purchased like a huge gun, like a working BB gun, right? And made a contract to say that this object has to be cleaned every single week by the collector. So I think it's very interesting how there was all this formulation of these sets of relations between the actual, physical sense of money in relationship to how this exhibition could be possible. So everything was very visible on that level. And I think what I was very interested in was to create a single gesture which allowed the money that was given to me to become invisible very quickly.
But somewhat beautifully as well. It's not like you're just like passing out dollar bills on the street.
Yeah, I think it was important for me to have a kind of mediated experience, and also an experience that's based solely on chance. For me, like the connection that would occur between me and someone who finds the work is the work itself.
But so going back to that original question, was like, why Bolaño? Like, why?
I read in one of its interviews for a magazine that was published in Sao Paulo that the reason for him that he started to write novels was the fact that and in turn he stopped writing poetry.
Yep.
Was that he wanted to start to earn a living, which I thought was a totally lucrative basis for life,
Yeah, it's like moving from artist to art critic.
Yeah, and I thought it would be funny to sort of like again compress and compound these two ideas together, the relationship between money and literature.
And then but then Bolaño's relationship to Taiwan, I mean, he probably never visited Taiwan.
No, not at all.
But I was really impressed that there were so many copies of his books in the...
Yeah, he has this huge fan base in Taiwan, and recently his novel 2666 was translated into Mandarin, but only in mainland China. So the Taiwanese sort of refused to sort of import it because it's written in simplified Chinese.
Yeah.
But so all they had access to was really sort of like versions of them in English and in Spanish. And what was very interesting, I found out when I was trying to locate all these library books, is that a lot of the copies were being borrowed out and never returned for like 2 years or something. Yeah, I mean, just because Bolaño's literature was just really hard to sort of absorb in such a short time.
I mean, he's a writer of like both short stories and then also very long novels.
Yes.
So he has his modes vary enormously. But one thing that runs through his works is just this incredible like violence.
Yes.
Like in a variety of ways, but in 2066, I mean, there are just these horrendous chapters.
Savage detectives.
And savage detectives as well. I mean, but 2066, the middle book, deals with the killings on the border of northern Mexico and the southern United States, in which all of these women are being executed and dumped in the desert.
Yes.
And this just goes on for pages, and it's all to do with the drug cartels and prostitutions. But so I was trying to imagine this like moment where someone is reading this, some page, and they come across a banknote,
Yeah.
and like how that's such a perverse gift. Like, money is meant to be just this like very happy accident. The happiest accident is finding some money. But mid Bolaño,
I think
I don't know.
I think there's something also very interesting about the choice of the note itself, because I chose a $2,000 Taiwanese dollar note, which is actually very rare. So like actually a lot of people don't even know that it exists. So I think it's interesting that when someone actually finds it, they would actually question the validity of this note itself. So, and I think it's an interesting point to sort of bring up concerning the experience of reading his text in relationship to sort of encountering a completely different experience on top of it about finding money. For me, I think a lot of my work sort of expands itself like that, a kind of sort of relation, non-relation, which sort of formulates a possibility for new objects and situations to occur.
Well, and you were mentioning that this summer you're going to be in Berlin working on some of your own writing.
Yeah.
What are you working on? Are you finishing something? Or are you?
No, I'm actually very far from finishing it. It's a project that I began in 2007, and it's primarily a novel I've been working on since, which sort of happens. The entire narrative sort of happens in a very short span of time, of about 3 hours, and it's kind of like a conversation between a very old professor and how he's trying to finish his book, his last book, really. And it's essentially a conversation between him and his assistant. And it's sort of, this sort of encountered this moment where they realized after working together for 10 years that they just don't understand each other. And in turn, the book that they're working on just does not make sense.
Where is the story coming from?
I think as with a lot of my work, I think it deals with a kind of, how should I say, like a kind of degeneration of communication, of speech, a kind of, so to speak, a kind of breakdown of the network, of the structural, a kind of structural, and what you call that, systemic mode of things.
I mean, novels. You have this collaborative sci-fi novel, Philip, which you wrote several years ago, and which was in Miami a couple of years ago. So writing has always been kind of a big part of your practice, and then you also have these photographs, which are just stacks of books that you've recently read.
Yeah.
But so I always find it perverse that, you write, but then also in those photographs with the books are totally sealed in a way I mean, they're in the artist's head, and as the artist, you're just presenting them as the material that you've been absorbing. But then for viewers, there's absolutely no access to the content of those books.
Yeah, but they have access to the title, so they could just like Google it or buy it, right?
Your reading lists, yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think also the experience of literature extends beyond the act of reading for me. It's also a lot about the idea of just sort of discovering something and then sort of having developed a journey with it.
But I find that interesting in relationship to the postcards, which are like the exact opposite of texts in that they're almost without context.
You think so? I think it's very similar to writing, actually.
Really?
Yeah, because I think a lot about writing deals with a kind of sensibility for detail, and I think this project is essentially everything about detail. It's almost haunted by detail.
Yeah, but they're details without a larger picture.
Well,
I mean,
if you buy all of them, you get a whole picture.
If you know how to put them together.
No.
No, then the picture is rotating.
It's not sequential.
Yeah, but as I don't know, I'm going to disagree with you on this because I think that they're such tightly cropped snapshots that there's no there are two motorcycles behind you, but there's no way to tell if they're both in Germany or one's in Germany and one's in who knows where, Singapore or France. I mean, there are little bits of language and signage that give you a clue to context. But in the way that you move from very specific places to very tight details.
But do you remember that passage in 2666? And sort of, I think it was the third chapter, the third book, and there was this huge conversation between this father and his daughter, and for 60 pages, you just didn't understand what the hell he was talking about. And at the very last page, the daughter replied, saying, "Dad, I have absolutely no idea what the hell you're talking about." I think that's kind of, a kind of literature that I like a lot. That it's not really about telling a story as much as sort of immersing the audience within a kind of empathy. And I think it's exactly what I want to do with the postcards as well, and that's why I've made them into postcards instead of photographs. So it's really somehow through the distribution of the work that creates a kind of a sense of generosity, which translates then into a situation where we can read images outside of the context of art, for example.
Yep. Speaking of generosity and giving things away, you had a gallery show in February in London, and you turned the gallery into a bookstore.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about both what you did there and then
Yeah. The show was at Rossi and Rossi in London, and what I did was to spend about 5 months before the actual project, the actual show, to just buy books, off eBay.
What kind of books are you buying?
Science fiction and fantasy books.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of it sort of deals with a kind of projection of one's imagination about both the future and a kind of fantastic past. So I kind of like that this space, which was is essentially, like Rossi and Rossi sort of deals with antiques.
Yep.
And I like how that space is immediately transformed into a situation that deals with antiques, secondhand books, antiques, but at the same time antiques that talk about the future.
Yeah. And antiques that are, kind of at the opposite spectrum of the preciousness and rarity.
It's not a Buddha.
It's not a 13th century, one of a kind object.
Yeah.
So the gallery was filled with books, with these sci-fi books,
Around
and you were selling them, right?
Yeah, we sold them each at £1. So it was basically just a very quick way of, again, creating a kind of link between me and a kind of assumed audience.
Right. But there's no... you didn't mark those books in any way.
We did.
You did. So there's something that says that...
We just had a stamp in it that said that it's bought from this bookshop called Lem 1.
Lem 1 was your bookshop.
Yeah.
But no authorship necessarily, or...
No. I mean, it's not an artwork.
And in terms of people who were coming to buy books, were they like art audience collectors? I mean,
No,
it's, or
I think a lot of the people who actually came to the bookshop were science fiction.
huh. Okay.
You know,
Was it,
fanatics.
so then was this selection in some way curated, like, or not?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the entire, I would say like around 35% of the bookshop is curated. 35%
maybe I'm
would be
overusing that word,
like
but,
stuff that you know, would be part of a certain reading list that's, you know, found in every kind of science fiction list possible.
And so there was one edition of each novel, or were there some
no,
duplicates?
there were
or?
some doubles as well.
Mhm,
I mean, for example, like I also included Roberto Bolaño within the bookshop because, you know.
Yeah,
Why
well,
not?
he is a kind of science
Yeah,
fiction,
exactly.
But the near future,
Yeah.
you know, which
But
I
very recent sort of fragmented past.
exactly. Okay, so all of these, I mean, the mode of distribution, like with your own writing, how's that going to figure with when you're finished writing your novel? Like, how are you going to distribute it?
I'm hoping that it would not be an art project, or it wouldn't be sort of distributed via sort of an art sort of publisher. And I'm actually working with a publisher right now who's just dealing in literature. So I think it'll just be seen as a novel, really.
A novel written by an artist, or
Yeah.
just by Heman Chong?
A novel written by a novelist, I guess.
Don't become Herman Chong.
Yeah, I'm trying not to.
Okay, good. No pseudonyms.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And to be published in Asia, or?
I'm working with a publisher from LA now.
Okay, cool. That'll be great. We look forward to seeing it. Or reading
Me too.
it. Great. All right.
We're
Thanks,
done?
Heman. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.